Fuck me, this is high up. Thought you might enjoy the view. I'd enjoy the night off. Can't offer you that, sadly. Is that the Capitol down there? Indeed it is. Big. Your grasp of the obvious is laudable, Your Grace. First of all, fuck you. Second, don't start with that shit. I get enough from the mortal fuckwits. Also, care to explain more about this becoming a god thing? I do not, but I will, just not now. Why not now? Now is for something else. What? If you would stop interrupting to ask questions, I would answer anyway. You would find out. Good. Now, I need you to read something. Read what? This. Podcast talking. The fuck is this? An ad for a podcast? Exactly. Do you think you could read it again? I just read it. Out loud. Why? Humor your patron? I feel like the last time I did that, I died coming down a mountain and lost a damn sword I could have used to conquer the world. Yes, that was rather unfortunate. However, it was rather amusing, and I swear upon the gods, there is almost no chance of death from this. Any chance of fishing? About as much as dying. Okay, reading it out loud. Welcome, listener, to the fantastic and insightful Long-Winded One podcast, where tonight you shall be graced with the unbridled wit and dulcet tones of Neil Hellegers and Eric Ugland as they discuss the world of Valdrani. What the fuck is that? What the fuck is what, exactly? They're talking about the world? I would imagine so. Maybe other things as well. How and why? You are familiar with a podcast, yes? Sure, but they'll be talking there. And you want me to read this as an ad? More an intro. I'm not doing it. It's already done. What is? The ad? When? Just now. Now? Now, let's not get into those weeds. Moving on. Wait. Due apologies, but I must force a change of topics.
Welcome to Season 5 of the Long-Winded One podcast. Listen as we showcase original work from top Royal Road authors read by professional voice actors. Hear interviews from your favorite lit RPG and game lit authors. Lastly, listen as the Long-Winded One tries his hand at his first ever lit RPG novel, The Four Treasures.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of The Long-Winded One. With me tonight, I have the Batman and Robin of the Valdrani world.
It's a Nightwing situation, but that's fine.
Nightwing, okay, all right. I have Eric Ugland and Neil Hellegers with me. Eric is the author of The Good Guys, The Bad Guys, The Grim Guys, and hopefully we will hear more about what I think is going to be called The Ugly Guys, which are set in the world of Valdrani. And the person who brings those characters to life is Neil Hellegers, the voice actor, the narrator extraordinaire. Welcome to the podcast, you guys.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, very glad to be here.
We probably have some people listening to this podcast who have never been in the world of Valdrani. They might not have ever picked up one of the 370 audiobooks that Neil has done on Audible. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Let Robin go first.
I've been an audiobook narrator for about 11 years or so. I pace it to the life of my child, so every time I look at him, I'm like, how long? That long. And I come from a sort of a wider acting background of stage and film and TV, and I've done all those kinds of different work over the years at various periods of time, doing more like earlier on, more stage work, more theater work, and that kind of verged into doing more commercial work, and I spent a long time playing a lot of goofy dads in TV when Phil Dunphy was very popular, and so that every commercial was that goofy dad. And I've done a run of a bunch of the New York television shows, your Law and Orders, your Madam Secretaries, and
House of Cards.
House of Cards. Yeah, yeah. I played about a lot of bearded professionals, a lot of doctors and lawyers.
Yeah, you were a doctor in that one, I believe.
Yeah, that was a crazy experience because I mean that was like right at the end of that show, and everyone was kind of feeling it, and she was absolutely like the director was deferring to her at every single turn. I don't want to say her name because I don't think you have to pay her money. um, but all along that time was like I needed I was starting a family and coming together, and I'd always been an inveterate reader, and it just made sense, and I sort of built up this sort of know-how, and did the coaching for this particular kind of work, and adapted my skill sets, which were very complementary in terms of dialect work, accent work, vocal work. I had a really good vocal teacher, who kind of is the basis of everything I still kind of do in terms of my vocal quality and preparation, and how I prep dialects and things like that, and do vocal placement and all that kind of stuff. And I've been very, very, very fortunate, especially during the pandemic, to be an actor who had all this kind of great work to do at home, in the most hermetic environment possible, which is this tiny room I'm sitting in right now. And it's also been very fortunate in terms of finding my way into Gamelit, and the kind of an arena of working as an audiobook narrator where I'm largely be able to work directly with the authors I'm narrating, which doesn't always happen, and with authors that have become friends too, which is lovely and fantastic, and just makes the work better, as far as I'm concerned. So happy to be that things worked out that they exactly the way they did, and I'm tickled to be able to kind of do my job, and but like I said, I try to never take it for granted, and I always try to keep myself grounded, and always be trying to do better, always be trying to improve my work as I go along.
What he said. Same for me.
Same exactly, huh?
Pretty close. Okay, the how did I get here? Um, this goes back to when my wife and I moved to LA. She got a job that was good enough that I could be a full time writer without necessarily having to worry about the money, and I just wrote whatever I wanted to write, and that meant that really no one read what I wrote. And then I found Gamelit, and we were that nice job had gone away, and I kind of had to make money, and I saw that Gamelit was successful, and I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, I read almost everything that was out there, and I said, this is the kind of style I want to go for, and just started writing it. And I kind of was given Neil's name by Tantor Audio, and they're like, we think this guy would be good, and I was like, okay. That's fine. And I wasn't even paying attention because I wasn't going to deal with audiobooks. I figured the best thing I could do was write another book. So I considered audiobooks kind of like free money.
It's exactly how I feel about it too. It just I say words and the money just arrives somehow.
I mean, I don't even do that. I just send a file off somewhere, and all of a sudden I start getting checks back. So I was
Crazy.
really letting them run with it, and sort of trusted that they would do what they thought would earn them the most money.
Do you mind if I ask you a question about those early books, Eric? I've kind of scoured the internet, trying to not duplicate questions that you've answered on other podcasts, and I've heard reference to these early books, but looking on your website, I only see the lit RPG stuff. Are you able to talk about some of those early things that you wrote?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, like, I own all the rights. So I wrote a mystery series called Roseland, and that got republished by LMBPN, which is the company that Michael Anderle set up. And so I think, they own publishing rights, but, it's all, I can still talk about all of it. It's just nobody reads it. So I've never bothered to do anything to push it on the website so as to not to confuse people. But there is a whole channel on my Discord where,
Yeah, they're very keen on you putting that into audio.
yeah, 3 or 4 people who are very passionate fans of series I promise to someday think about writing again.
I've heard it said that you kind of, Eric, at least you immersed yourself in Gamelit, before you started writing in it. You just kind of read a whole bunch of things.
So this was relatively early in the life cycle of lit RPG and game lit, and kind of, I could get very wrong in all of this, but from my understanding, it was starting to become an English thing or English language thing in like 2015, 2016, somewhere around in there. And I started paying attention and reading it in 2017 or 2018. I can't quite remember exactly when it is. And I just kind of looked at what the most popular things were. And at that point, I didn't even know about Royal Road. So I didn't touch anything that was on there. I wasn't reading anything that was sort of like light novels or on Wattpad or anything that wasn't on Kindle Unlimited or within the Kindle biosphere. So I read um, Alan Kong's books, the Land series, and Dakota Kraut's Dungeon Core. What else? I think read some of James Hunter. Basically, like everything that was out in the summer of 2018, in the spring of 2018, I just devoured, and I just was like, I don't care really the quality of it. I just want to get at the breadth of what's there. So I read some of the Russian stuff. I read some of the Korean stuff.
Now, is this the period that you referred to as the golden age of lit RPG?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's a golden age in terms of the authors. Not to say anything bad about their content. I think that the content has grown in quality and breadth tremendously. But from an author point of view, the public, the readers were so desirous of content. They wanted content more than they wanted quality. And so it didn't matter what you were doing. If you were writing something that was within the sphere of lit RPG, people would read it and buy it. And so from an author point of view, it was this golden sort of gold rush, I think is a better way to describe it than the golden period of it. It was the gold rush
Gold
time.
rush time.
Ah, yeah.
Yes.
So that, yeah, you could really easily make a lot of sales without having to do much work. The discoverability was basically just slapping lit RPG somewhere on your cover, and that was enough to get you people reading it. And I think that we are getting more into what I would say is a golden age in terms of like it's still new. The tropes are yet to be cemented, but they're sort of beginning to firm up and become more established. And I think that we're still in the phase where people are experimenting and seeing what's possible. And I'm continually amazed at the sort of stuff that is coming out.
Well, Neil, did you get involved right around what Eric's now calling the gold rush?
I love that analogy because it makes so much sense in terms of it developing its own ecology, separate from tradition, even other non-traditional publishing. It's a lot more like romance, but exactly how I got involved with Eric in the Valdrani books. It's really kind of the same thing. It's old Tantor. It was 2015, and they sort of randomly like, here is a book from a Russian author named Michael Adamanov. A series called Perimeter Defense, and have you? It's gamelit. Do you know of it? I'm like, no. What the heck is this? Because I'd always been a gamer in many ways, even though actually not even as much of an RPG player. Even though I did play a ton of D&D when I was younger, my gaming of choice still is FPS and things like that. But the Russians were my entree to it, and they kind of emerged from there. And even Perimeter Defense, in terms of standards of what Gamelit has kind of come to, is considered what you call non-crunchy. There's stats involved, but it's not heavy in that respect. It's more about the story and the strategy and the development of it's more progression than it is anything else. And also, and I think this has always laid the groundwork for how I think of Gamelit. It's sci-fi. It's not fantasy based Gamelit. It's space battles. It's like EVE Online kind of. And so I've always, even the stuff that operates as high fantasy, I always think of Gamelit as a sci-fi genre. And that's also my proclivity is like, I grew up reading a lot of sci-fi and a lot of fantasy, but I always lean towards, in that genre equation, I always lean back towards sci-fi when I have time to read my own books. It's always usually sci-fi. And also because even in the most fantasy environment, whether you're fighting with a shield and a sword, you still have screens popping up in front of your face, which is still sci-fi to me. It still that's it, the video game, to the technology of it, in my mind, always makes, and almost all game lit, sci-fi. And there's I think what's happened, which is really fascinating since 2015, those are the 11 years I was talking about, is what is kind of basically like a closed box of what qualifies as the genre. It takes place in a game, and somehow you have a main character that has found their way into that universe, whether they're born into it or that they isekai their way into it. Um, take that the challenge of making that basic, very core premise into a flowering, huge genre, has been really fascinating to watch and be a part of in some way, in terms of the creativity about reinventing that idea in some ways that are completely identical but still innovative for the way it is done. Whether the voice or the plot line that develops after they happen to end up in that different world is where the innovation lies. But like I said, I felt lucky to kind of get in at that point and kind of be already a few years into it when the real gold rush came about. Yeah, I would say that sounds right to me too. A few years after that, when it just became suddenly very multiplicative in terms of all the applications of it. It was years later. The series that I started, Michael Adamonoff, takes place in distant space. And then another series called Reality Benders that was brought into by the same author, Michael Adamonoff, folded back into that series eventually. So it was like me digging out my very earliest gamelit files to be like, what was that guy's voice? Okay, that's what. Okay. I guess that's a choice I made back in 2015, and resurrecting that to kind of come back into the current day of gamelit, which has been great to kind of witness and be a part of.
And I just will probably be crucified from the other authors who have witnessed this on many a lit RPG panel, but I have to say that I don't necessarily view lit RPG or game lit or even progression as a genre so much as a style that's slapped on other genres.
In line with that, on all of your book covers, you have this graphic that almost looks like a rating, right? And it says GL, game lit novel. Was that a stylistic choice from you, or did Tantor decide to do that?
That was my cover designer. She decided that she wanted to try and make it look kind of like a video game, and so that's why it has like the bars on it and has the rating, just because like we were playing against that.
Is it just me, or have the book covers changed in the last year? Have you gone through and sort of changed old book covers, like updated covers?
Originally, I did have a pixel art style in the very first ones, and I did like the first three or four. And the first pixel artist I used, he was phenomenal, but I was the last commission he was doing before he began his like 3 year service with the Korean military, the South Korean military. And so he wasn't going to do it anymore. This is kind of like what he was doing, to earn money before military, and then he was going to go have a real life after that. And then I found another pixel artist, and they basically like took the money and didn't really ever turn in a cover. And then I found a third pixel artist who did a pretty good job but was constantly late. And then I found a fourth one who was great for a few of them and then just like ghosted, and then like frantically delivered like some really sort of marginal quality pixel art. And it's just like, I was like, all right, I'm done. I knew a friend that had a good lit RPG book cover designer, and I was like, "Who do you use?" I'm done. I'll just use that person. I don't care anymore. And that's it. And then since then, the same person has done them. She's great. She uses different artists, so I don't necessarily know who is doing the art for all of them, but it's all done through her, and she does all the typography and sort of the other elements to tie it all together and make it work. And I feel like I have been doing my utmost to get rid of everything but the writing of the books itself.
Well, with your schedule, that doesn't. I mean, that's probably a good decision.
I mean, I've been behind for 3 years now.
I want to come back to Neil, if we can. I want to fast forward a little bit from what we were just talking about, and I've heard Eric say like, "Oh, you know, Tantor floated like a couple of narrators his way, and he really liked Neil. But I want to hear this story from your side. I want to hear. Does a narrator working for Tantor or Podium or whomever, do they have any say? I mean, can you pick up a book and be like, I want to do this?
I mean, if I recall it, and I kind of looked back through my email to kind of sort of confirm this, it was very much like a, "Hey, are you available?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah." And this is 2019, right? So after this has been about 4 years of various kinds of game and this and that, and they were just, "Would you like to?" And one never knows exactly what they're getting, but when I get a book, I do sort of do an initial kind of check on it. And it's a different process for romance work, let me tell you. But in this particular case, it was like, yeah, this seems like right along the lines of other kinds of books that I've done, and it was without even really having a chance to get into the meat of it or the content of it. It was a slow dawning of like, I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, I got this book. It's great. It seems like it's going to be part of a series. That's always a nice kind of get in terms of perpetuating work. As I delved into it and started working on it, and even just communicating with Eric about it, I was like, oh, this feels, it really did have a feel of like, oh, this is a completely different realm or a different approach to this than I had felt before. And I think I always tied it into like, it made sense to me in terms of the main character, in terms of Montana, because like in other circumstances, the main characters were always, even if they had been like unfortunately portaled to some other world or whatever, however it happened, they were like, oh, this is completely my bag and I'm completely into this. And it was less so for Montana. So it was this opening up of the idea for me about being, and I think this goes along with what you're saying about it being about it not being a genre so much as a style, it's sort of a conventions laid into anyone's writing style. In this particular case, it was like the perspective of this gaming universe from someone who is not a gamer was always my entree into it, and as always was what would click with me about it was like, this is just a real fucking dude. This is just a real guy, and he's in this circumstance where there are these, to most people, outlandish fantasy tropes. But even Valdrani wasn't necessarily even handling them in the same way that I would find sort of elsewhere. And I always kind of say with any genre, like please have a sense of humor about it. Otherwise, what are we doing here? It makes the depth so much more palatable to absorb when you get when that is introduced as well. But it gives a real grounding to what's happening, even if there's whatever jokes are being made, it's still real. And the first email that I sent to Eric asking about this, and it's just like, hello, hope this finds you doing well. So standard. I'm writing because I've been selected to narrate your series. So first, thanks for the opportunity. And on that note, thanks for writing such a quality and fun addition to the lit RPG genre. I'm looking forward to where the series goes, and also just to get in the booth and give voice to Montana. So to that end, I have a few questions about a few details. If you could pass these on, I'd be very grateful. I'm not sure who I'm talking to.
I think you at that point you were still going fully through Tantor.
Yes, well, that's right, because the email is to Ugland and narrators. First, your name, is it Ugland or Ugland? It's neither. Is it Glaton or Glaton? Is it Agachnern? And some other things. And which is hilarious to me because I've been listening to these early books recently because my son's old enough and interested.
Oh
He
no.
plays more D&D than I do. To like, and I forgot about how I had that affectation that I just decided with the Agachnern to pronounce it Agachnern every single time, to like really attack that first, no matter who says it. And then Montana picks it up as like him being ironic about the way it was said to him, that everyone says it. Oh yeah, it's just the Agachnern,
Yeah.
But completely in line with the reality of the world. That's just the world that they're living in, And you responded, yeah, Eric Ugland is Ugland. Dovey, like dove, and it's Glaton, but this is relevant to the sort of early lore. I did not ask how the word Voldrani is pronounced. And I just went with like, oftentimes like, and I've come to learn this over the times, that Eric always has a specific pronunciation in mind. Many authors don't, and so I wouldn't ask, or I would take the liberty of it, particularly with some of the more Nordic kind of words that have been filtered into this world. But I did not ask about Valdrani. I just kind of went with it, and in a way that was not intended, it was wrong, sort of, but in a way that just ended up being, it's
I mean that's what it is now.
Supposed to be Valdrani, right? Was the
Well, yeah, I stole the word. It was, I mean, to be fully honest, I was a placeholder term for the world, and I just needed something, and Ghostbusters was on my mind, as it is almost all the time, and it was it was the slower and the Voldrani, or whatever that quote is.
The slower and the Voltron, yeah, no, and as soon as you mentioned, I'm like, "Oh, that's like." I think I probably at the time thought this word sounds vaguely familiar, but I think it's still Voldrani, um, because I have a deep love. Like Ghostbusters is always. I mean, whenever references come up, as they're sort of many. There's like a handful of times when Ghostbusters works into this. Like the building where Ghostbusters, like the Dana Barrett's building. My great aunt lived in that building at the time that they were filming that, so I showed up, and when I'm like 6 years old to like visit my great aunt, and there's like foam all over the streets and extras, and they're putting the lettering on the police car that's on a tilt on the cement in front of it, and then the lobby were the four Ghostbusters, who I didn't know who they were. They're just these guys with these backpacks and these big guns, and that was awesome enough. My dad was flipping out because it's all those guys, right? But the Ghostbusters has a very deep like core association kind of like love for me, and so that being said, obviously I swung and missed on Voldrani, but now it is what it is.
Well, it's spelled vastly differently in the in Ghostbusters,
Oh,
and
well, I never read the screenplay, but
I mean, so for me, it's also like it's a fundamental building block of my creativity. I saw that when I was 4 years old. And I got so scared. Well, originally it was told to me that I got so scared my mom had to take me out of the theater.
uh,
And I have later found out that I was enjoying the hell out of it. And my mom got so scared that she used me as the excuse to leave the theater.
I had to leave
Um,
during Secret of Nim when they sucked the essence out of the Gelfling. I had to be like, "This is too much for me." I had to leave.
well, that's the Dark Crystal.
Yeah, what did I say? The Dark
It's
Crystal?
the
I
Secret of
said Secret
Nim.
of Dim. I meant the Dark Crystal.
I love the Dark Crystal, and I like Labyrinth a ton.
Mm.
I'm looking up on my bookshelf, and I have the bestiary of the Dark Crystal, and the
Oh, because
bestiary
we
of
built
Labyrinth.
what's it? The little worm that was in the labyrinth that she first comes across was
Uh,
specifically in Bad Guys, in the most recent Bad Guys. We're like, that's that same character, right? Like, oh yeah, that's absolutely that. And
yeah,
it's the same voice. It's precisely that. But that's what always made sense to me about the whole world of Voldrani is that it's a construct. And it is built of all of these ideas that we've all had in our lives. So it opened up this freedom. I try to kind of build in what I'm interpreting with what I'm getting from the author in a way that makes sense culturally. But that's different when it's like this is a civilization that I mean that it's true for Valdrani that there are civilizations that have existed for a long time and have generated their own culture, but it is also consciously in this case the gods picking and choosing things that they want to build into the world, and so it opens up creatively what everything could happen. It doesn't, you don't have to be, there's not a strict cultural hermeticism to it, as opposed
right.
to it's open to all these references, and that's all these things are fair game to include vocal references to at the same time.
Can you tell us more about, as you were reading all of these books, Eric, were there parts of some of these books that you're like, "Ah, I'm definitely not doing that? Or, how did you end up on the world that we know?"
It's a difficult process to try to break down, but but part of it is just doing the old Picasso. Great artist steal concept. Not to say that I'm a great artist, but I certainly like to steal things. Um, but it's blending a lot of different things together. And so it first came about is that I was running my first ever D&D campaign the year before. So my son was born in 2016, and I stopped writing full time to be a full time dad, and I needed like a pressure release of creativity. And so I started. I have once a week. D&D game where I was the DM, and I built this world that would later become Voldrani, or how do you say it? Voldrani.
Voldrani
There you go. Neil, just say it when I need it.
will drain me.
There we go.
Yeah.
The world, and I had I'd built. Ironically, I had built a completely different continent that I guess technically no one has ever gone to, but I also had built up the empire of Glaton, and I've always been fascinated by the Holy Roman Empire, and kind of
Glaton.
how it was all. Oh shit! How do you say it? Glaton.
Glaton. Yeah.
Yeah, I said it, in
I
my
say
head.
well,
It is firmly Glaton.
Yeah, for Neil and I, we're like, "What are you talking about?"
Glaton.
Man,
Vaguely French though, but the names like Leon, like all those names of the Glaton royalty. But that's why I asked about Glaton or Glaton. The only difference I make, some people emphasize the T. If you're a little fancy, you say Glaton. But if you're not, you gottalize it and you say Glaton.
it's very strange because I do listen to the books, so I will listen to the audiobooks right before I write the next book in the series. So I'm about to jump into writing Good Guys 15. So I'm listening to Good Guys 14 to make sure any of the new characters I introduce and all that will be fresh in my mind as soon as I start writing. So it's there, but for some reason, some of the word pronunciations, even though it's been 26 books and 4 years, 5 6 years at this point, something like that.
6 years, yeah.
They're still like, it's still stuck in my head. And so anyways, I had built this world that was this blend of the Holy Roman Empire that was in a somewhat D&D vein, and I knew that was something I liked, was some of the sort of class systems from there. And I enjoyed the way that Alaron Kong had put some pieces of his world together, so I took some from there, and I liked some of the systems that I saw in Dakota Kraut's world, so I sprinkled some in there. And I played a lot of Skyrim, so I pulled it there, and I wanted a lot of customizability in terms of what people would be doing. Because I sat down and I tried to think about what it would be to live in with a system like this, and how would that be to have these things in your daily life and to see skills appearing and like what you can do. And so I tried to just imagine what it would be to have a living, breathing world with all this crap layered on top of it. And then I was like, well, how do I get somebody there? So then it's like, well, and then why would there be this thing? So there needs to be some sort of outside force that's acting upon the world to make it like this. All right, well, there's a bunch of gods that are playing on the world, and they all have a piece in it, and it's all orchestrated in that form, so that there is a system that's overlaid into this living world. And so if I was starting over again, which I do think about writing in other places. I'm not sure I will that much. I do have a book coming out in September. It's called Master of Puppets. It's with Athon. Asked me if I would do a book with them, and I said sure. And it's about a guy who is isekai'd into a world and wakes up in the body of a fuzzy toy. Anyway, so if I was, when I sit around and start doing world building, I try to think of what the purpose of the world would be, if it's going to be a living, breathing world, or if it's a discrete sort of a thing. Like if it, the skills and the powers only exist within a finite area, that really changes it, as opposed to it's like a big living world. And I think the biggest advice I ever got was only design the amount of the world you're going to be using. So don't spend your time building everything else. So, I didn't necessarily listen to that advice, but I try to limit it now, so I don't necessarily go far beyond what I have actually shown people. So I only have like an extra 6 or 7 continents instead of the entire planet done. Only a few hundred of the gods, not all. I forgot how many it would need to be, because it's supposed to be 8 layers of 8.
Right. The math is laid out at some point in terms of who's important, and
Yeah, that's it. Like I was like, I'm just gonna pick 8. I like that, because the originally was going to be the I Incarnate series,
hmm
and it's going to be following different people as they're incarnated into this system.
I'm always kind of
And
wondering about that sort of when that gets tied back around, because at the time I wasn't sure and didn't specifically ask about it, but whether I hedged my bets a little bit. This is a little bit of lore that Paul, Doctor, that Mr. Paul's voice isn't is close enough to, is it Norman, his friend, who calls him
mhm.
and offers him the out, to make them related voice. They're in the same sphere of voices. No, they're not precisely the same, but in the event that Mr. Paul ended up being Norman in some way, or at least his essence is somewhat related to it, I would be able to tie that back, because that's the only thing that made sense to me. That like why Mr. Paul was assigned to Montana had something to do with his entree point being led by his name is Norman, right? Am I remember that correctly?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I mean, so that's a character that's mentioned maybe 4 times in the whole series, and is actually in the like opening chapter of the book, and then nowhere else. Book 1. But I will confirm that Mr. Paul is not Normand. That they are not the same.
Well, if you
Um,
at some point wanted to build that back,
it's
Just to
the
I left the
opportunity is
door.
there.
The door is open. Yeah,
Yeah, and which I do appreciate.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Just covering my bases. You never know.
I often recommend the Good Guys series to people who have never read game lit or lit RPG, and in this I try to explain the idea because Montana is like he is the overpowered main character, right?
yeah,
In all the books that I've read, I never wonder whether Montana is going to win. Question that is replaced in my mind is he going to creatively, like, just overpower this person, right? It might not be
yeah.
now, it might be later.
Yeah, and then it's he was purposefully written that way. When I was coming up with that concept, that was what a lot of readers seem to really like, is that sort of overpoweredness. Now, from a writing perspective, it takes a lot more time to sit and figure out how to push the stakes around to make sure it's not just him walking through the world with no problems. You understand uh, the writers of Superman trying to come up with ways to challenge him. And he kind of is. He doesn't fly by himself. He has someone who flies him around places, but it's still like, yeah, he is a wrecking ball in a china shop, and it's just kind of like, how can he? The goal isn't. It's not will he win. It's like, can he win without destroying everything in the process?
Or but the people he cares about still are, even if
Right.
he's nigh invulnerable or basically invulnerable, that's not true of the people he cares about, or
Exactly.
he's responsible for. So during whatever given siege of wherever he is, even if he's able to go out and slaughter countless goblins, a lot of other people get hurt, and he can't do anything about that. And so, what is OP when you're not a god, yet? What really tears you up is, despite the fact that you're able to slaughter with great proficiency, you still can't save so and so from getting bitten by some random lizard thing that makes them, that they're lying there near death, and you can't do a thing about it, no matter how unbreakable your bones are.
Right. And that is definitely something that is important to me as the author, and writing is making sure that people understand that, and using that as the vehicle, the engine to drive forward plot and things like that. That he is this being of great power, but he has an otter buddy that sits on his shoulder that could get squashed accidentally by him.
I have to ask because I must have come into this at the perfect time. But I started on the Good Guy series. I think I think maybe you were up to Flex in the City when
Hmm.
when Montana first came to Glaton. And then I switched gears. I think you had written some of the Bad Guy series. But what was really cool about going from Flex in the City to the Bad Guy series was that I got introduced to the city of Glaton before I was immersed in the city of Glaton. So the places that were mentioned in the Bad Guy series, I had some familiarity with.
Oh, that's cool.
Do you have like a reading order that you recommend to people?
Well, I never really did, but then I have a phenomenal group of readers, and they came up with their own reading list. So this is the suggested reading order via the people who know the books better than I do at this point.
Your World Anvil people?
Yes, they help build the World Anvil. They are the beta readers who catch all the things and help me fill in all the what color of eyes does this person have.
They listen to me stumble through the recording as well.
Hmm. Yeah, they'll listen to Neil live. So okay, start. You do good guys 1 and 2, then bad guys 1 and 2, good guys 3 to 6, bad guys 3, good guys 7, bad guys 4 to 7,
All right.
good guys 8 to 11, bad guys 8 to 9, grim guys 1,
Yeah.
good guys 12 to 14, and then it'll be bad guys 10 and 11.
They must have reasons for this, right? That they've talked about.
Yeah, so what they say is it's not exactly chronological, but it makes the best plot ties and story overlap.
That's the one that I've referred to as the hatchet order. The crossover is kind of happening at this point, and it was mostly on the last one where I was going back into old recordings and lifting chunks of that, copy and pasting chunks of the old recordings of the into the other one, so it'd be completely consistent. Um, Even though I think I kind of, Eric, messed you up a little bit because you deliberately, I think, reduced some cuss words that I restored in the audio.
Yes. Well, so essentially, it, one of the things that I try to make clear is that these are not necessarily 100% perfectly reliable narrators that are giving you the exact story. It's from their point of view, and so when it is Clyde that is telling his version of it, he doesn't have any of the curse words in, at least in the ebook version or the paper versions.
At some point, if these two dudes ever talk about like being it clear for me as a narrator, it's this voice and it's this voice, because I think initially I did a lot more differentiation, and or was concerned about it. Clyde having a rougher kind of lower voice, but Montana also is so physically large that it's hard to avoid that sort of pitch range as well too. But when
Yeah,
you have Clyde seeing Montana for the first time, all the descriptions like, wow, what a tank this dude is. Was a chance to kind of like for the sections that I did redo, and I did redo a lot of it, even though it was the same dialogue, was to do that exact thing. Like, if you're seeing a person who's huge, how do you remember what they sound like? It being not
yeah,
100% exactly the same as what it was when we first heard it in and the books from Montana's point of view. But again, so that when they do eventually have some kind of contact, we can have some more differentiation between the two. My force of habit in a lot of things is the main character is largely my own voice, or in terms of pitch and placement. That's not always true. If he's like a big orc, like in Kevin Sinclair's books, it'd be a different kind of thing altogether. Or if there's an accent involved, of course, things like that too. But I did that for that exact reason of being like, this is how Clyde sees Montana, and he sounds a
yeah.
little bit different than how Clyde hears himself. Montana hears himself.
I was actually wondering about that. I didn't remember whether Clyde had actually met Montana at that party.
They don't talk to each other, but Clyde is literally a fly on the wall for a whole scene of Montana's.
There's a couple of they are in the same geographical location, and I think Montana sees Clyde once,
Yeah.
He
but
sees, yeah,
otherwise,
he sees someone talking to, I think he even says an elf or something,
right?
yeah, across the room, talking to
Not yet.
Nadia. Yeah.
I think I could probably talk about this stuff for a really long time and keep you guys all night. But I am interested in hearing more about both the new series, The Grim Guys, which is, I don't think as new as I think it is, right? It's new in terms of being on Audible, but it's been written for a while, isn't that right?
Yes. So Yonder asked me to write something for them when they launched, and I was going to write them something completely different, and they asked if it could be something within that same world, and so I was trying to come up with something that wasn't going to intersect with any of the other stories. And I was like, well, I love coming up with the monsters. What if I, try to come up with sort of a monsters of the week sort of a thing, so that if this really takes off, I can keep it going with just doing, this week, what are they hunting? And so it's these two guys who are ghost hunters in this world,
Ghost
and
hunters.
right, who get isekai'd into the other world by a god who misunderstands what ghost hunting is and presumes they are actual monster hunters.
Hilarity ensues.
And then they are in the neighboring country, so you do get, you'll get some of the political views of the other country that is currently at war with Glaton or Glaton.
And because it's written for another group, the chances of them kind of, you know, going to Glaton City or meeting Montana are probably slim to none. Is that right?
Well, not anymore. So Yonder decided they didn't want to continue with it, so now it's back to being mine, and I will be writing the second one probably later this year. I started it already, just haven't been able to get it done. But it is specifically something smaller, so I don't know I don't know that it will tie in. It certainly could. There's nothing that is stopping it from tying into sort of the larger story I have planned. But at present, it's more like you know uh, James Harriet's stories of being a vet, except they're stories of being monster hunters.
Well, the crossover so far is about the horses. That's all, and of slicing men when they were going up against the war horses.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's the fibers are there.
Yeah, and I do try to take advantage to just show more of the world, and I've tried to make it as series agnostic the whole way, so that if you only read the bad guys, you will still get a full story experience, never touching the good guys, and same way around. So, but you will get more if you read them all. You do get a broader view of everything, and the same will be with the ugly guys whenever I get around to getting that one out.
Is this going to be centered on a group of kobolds, possibly that we have met already?
So the main character has been, at least definitely been referenced, and probably has been there. Um, I'm not 100% sure that I'm going to keep it that way.
Is this in the enclave that also in Slicing Men of all those kobolds that are there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
of the most recent good guys when they
yeah,
come
yeah.
through. Yeah,
That whole city that he comes across underneath underneath the mountain.
So there's three groups of kobolds that we've met so far. There's the ones that kind of work with and serve Montana, right? Not serve Montana, but are a part of that settlement, right back in Cogs Hall.
correct. Yeah.
There's the one that kind of live underneath of Clyde's compound,
Yep.
and are the messengers in Glaton.
Hmm.
And then Neil referenced the new group of kobolds that kind of helped. Was it helped Montana out of a tough spot, right, in the most recent book?
Right. Well, there's actually also the fourth group was the ones that were helpers and servants of the dragon and Gloomguard. And so yeah, so we've seen a couple of different groups, and there's been talk of the kobold hero that's rising and all that
They're
sort
all
of
in touch
stuff.
with each other. It seems like because
Right.
a lot of the Glaton kobolds have left, and no one knows why. But they're like, oh yeah, they're all gone off somewhere. There's something happening somewhere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because kobolds can kind of naturally build portals or doors into the gloom, which then they can get around much quicker. So they can zip. It doesn't take them to months to go across the entire continent. They can just dig into the gloom and
Do
then
we know
pop
that?
over to where they.
Is it the first time I'm hearing that? I don't feel like
It's
it.
the first time I'm hearing it. That's awesome.
Now we know that. Now you know that too, listener.
I feel like Baltu had talked about that's how he got from, because he had been down in Glaton in the capital city.
Didn't we discussed at some point that Baltu is in Gremlins the gremlin that takes the smart that drinks the smart serum,
Right.
in Gremlins 2 I should say, that he's the Latin interpretation of that cultural phenomenon.
I have lampshaded this a little bit, but he stole that potion
Right, he
from
said
the
he stole a
Faden.
potion. That's right. Yeah, from the
Oh,
Faden.
Yeah, so
Right.
right.
he stole it
Oh
from
God, I
the
love the Faden and
Clyde's
Mrs. Faden. The
Yeah.
Faden. I
from
love
Clyde's mentor.
it. Feels like I'd say, I'm not a witch. I'm your wife.
Yeah, my wife, every time I come upstairs to play Dungeons and Dragons, she says, "Have fun storming the castle."
Yeah,
I could talk forever on this.
I mean, this is the long-winded one, right? So
It
Yeah, right there it is.
So I'm curious about. I know Neil has some Shakespearean roots, and I'm wondering if you've tapped into any of those roots for any of these books so far.
For some of the tongue twisters for sure, in terms of language. Before I have a lot of like experience working with Shakespeare, and I taught Shakespeare for a long time, and it's like a milieu I kind of live in otherwise. But before that, I was a lot more deeply immersed in Chekhov. The thing about Anton Chekhov, Russian playwright, is that he had a particular kind of form of humor that wasn't joke based humor. His very famous plays like The Cherry Orchard are referred to as comedies, and there was a thing about Chekhov for a long time that it was all about the ennui and the suffering and Russian peasant life and all that. But the humor that he generated in those that I've always really connected to is the humor of the recognition of the tragedy of everyday life. And I know it doesn't sound hilarious on the base of it. Like I said, it's always very important to me that the most serious topics in the world are connected to humanity via humor. And I think a lot of that is what I see in terms of the circumstance of being in a really tough spot, but still finding a moment to make a joke at one's own expense. It is definitely applies to Montana. It certainly applies to Clyde as well too. And then the Shakespeare part of it, there's a way of I've been finding this increasingly as I'm starting to kind of bring I taught Shakespeare a lot. I've been trying to bring that into starting to teach more, coaching more narration, things like that. Is that your standard monologue, your to be or not to be or whatever isn't something that like Hamlet was thinking about last week, and he's reflecting on it and tell you what he was thinking last week. It's it's his thoughts in the moment as he's processing what's happening to him. Every soliloquy is essentially mechanically that. It's the character connecting, talking directly to the audience, as was the intention, the physical intention of the actor on stage, directly addressing the audience and working through what's happening to them. And so much of narration, and particularly in these books, is Clyde or Montana going on about like, how am I dealing with this? How am I processing this and dealing with it in the moment, even if it's written in past tense? That doesn't matter to me. And because it is first person, and so I always think of it in that vein. I always think of it's Montana's to be or not to be, or it's Clyde's, oh, this too new noble flesh may melt and resolve itself into a dew. That mechanic of working things out in the moment is the way I narrate kind of everything, but it feels combined with what I was saying about that, trying to find humor in the darkest moments, combined with that sort of Shakespearean soliloquy processing. I try to use that to buttress and make what I'm doing more immediate for the listener. If the listener is also on a journey, as things happen, and they're having a laugh with us at the same time, then they're connected to it on all sorts of intellectual and emotional ways at the same time as these characters experience the story. And that always makes for a better listening experience, I hope. And it's also a more interesting recording experience for me to be. I mean, obviously, I've read the book beforehand. Of course, I prep, but having that sort of sitting in my subconscious as I'm going through and rediscovering all the moments and having it hit me and having it being real keeps me. For me, that's what keeps it from being floofy fantasy in any way, because it is still real human immediate realizations about the really dire things or complicated things happening to someone in their life.
And if it's real to you, it's going to be that much more real to the listener.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I have one more question for you. So, and this is my favorite question. This is just favorite parts. So for Neil, what has been your favorite part to play in any book so far? And Eric, what has been your favorite character voice?
I mean, I'm a sucker for the kobolds, so it's probably Boris. And like, or like one of the ones where they're like having the conversation in the sewers and they get very confused with each other because they're very literal creatures.
Yeah.
And those are probably my favorite moments where
You said go
like,
back.
yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah.
Or it might be like some of the throwaway lines, like who's like when Ragnar's like, well, who's being the semantical asshole now?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I look for those moments, and when I can find that the moment to write it, knowing that Neil's going to be able to put it out there, I just get this joy.
It's great that you said that, Eric, too, because it's like my favorite parts of any of the books is when there's like 2 or 3 pages of just dialogue between two characters, no attributions, just like back forth, back forth, back forth. So it's just like quotations. And it goes on because it feels like it feels incredibly organic. Attributions are always kind of a throwaway anyway, too, and that's where you really get into the individual specific dynamic between those two people, usually whether it's Montana, Clyde, or whomever, and whoever that other person is. We learn the most about everyone in those moments, and they're just fun to do. I can immerse myself in them with just this character, and it's the same as any acting scene, because in any acting scene, when you're on stage or whatever, you're not saying I said. You're just saying what you say, and so I love whenever those come up. I love the conversations that Clyde has with the god of war, right? In the imagined
Adventure.
adventure, yeah, in the
Yeah,
imagined pizza place in Queens. Just because I had a notion about the like, if this god is putting on a persona, it would, and he chose this environment, he would just be this guy from Queens,
it's the
and he's just
Bronx.
having Bronx. Thank you.
Gosh.
God, it's such a hack. I'm so sorry. Um, it's not Brooklyn. That's all I know. All right. The kobolds are a ton of fun. I love when there's big fuck off monsters come along, and kind of figuring out like where they're just naked Odo from Labyrinth again, and like, oh, are always fun to have. As a departure from the sort of more gritty, realistic form of conversation, it's always great to kind of do those big character voices, or always as a contrast. Really, literally, like I parcel them out in terms of how they work within my schedule. But it's like, oh, great, this is a good guys, this is a bad guys, this is a Valdrani week, are always incredible weeks, and I'm just glad the universe and Tantor decided things that they decided, and then this worked
Agreed.
out.
Yeah, it's been very. I feel very fortunate.
On that note, tell us, what are you guys working on and what's coming out soon?
Provided the date this comes out, the latest book that should be out is Bad Guys 11, and that will unfortunately mean that Good Guys 15 has been pushed a little bit, but that should be coming out shortly. Roughly end of May, I believe, is when it should be coming out now, and then over the summer, I don't know what I'm working on, but in September, I have Master of Puppets come out, which is a whole brand new world series thing, a blend of, Jim Henson darkness and tower climber fun.
Neil, what about you?
Let's see. Outcast from Another World, which is a favorite series of mine, by Kamikaze Potato, a railroad guy.
Fantastic name.
Book 5 of that is coming out pretty soon. One of the next books I'm working on is a book called Jury by Michael Head, which is a great book. This is all gamelit stuff. I just did a couple of Harlan Ellison, either written or edited anthologies that just came out, which were a lot of fun to do. I do a lot of short story work for Blackstone Audio, who are great, and it was always kind of a nice trip. I just did Arcane Cultivator 2, that Harmon Cooper just came out, giving some other stuff of his, some other series I've worked on before. Mages of the North, also a kobold main character series, A Dream of Wings and Flame, book 3, that came out a little while ago. Great book by Cale Playman. Rise of the Winter Wolf, fun book by a guy named Shane Purdy. A book 2 of that came out. Wish Upon the Stars 3, I could kind of go on. Malcolm Tent, another also great railroad name. Rise of Oshbob 2, great orc book that's was done in live duet, which was a fun recording experience. Like I said before, I'm very consider myself very fortunate to have these sort of like endless rolling narratives from like week or 2 weeks or 2 weeks, kind of like going on all the time. And within that is, there's a lot of game lit. There's a good amount of variety that comes within that if it's not game lit books. But it's also so much of the work that I do is independent. And what I really love about that is that, not that this doesn't happen in trad publishing, but in my experience, it's always the independent authors like Eric, who I get to know, and can like feel like the old school theater head in me that loves to collaborate more than just sort of strike out on my own. That there's the opportunity to do that. That we're working. It's their project. It's their love child that I get to kind of like mentor in a way, or to contribute toward their education. And I always, like I said, when it comes around to those books, I'm like, oh, wonderful! I get to go into this person's head for at least this week or 2 weeks, and it's always a great time.
And I try to make it as painful as possible. I mean,
Yes.
painless as possible.
With convoluted Norwegian phraseology.
The Nightwing to your Batman.
Exactly.
Well, thank you both so much for coming on the
thank you.
podcast. This
Thank
has been
you.
a lot of fun.
Yeah,
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us down this Lit RPG deep dive. Please consider giving us a review on Apple Podcasts and visit us over at longwinded.one, where you can see past episodes and find all of our socials, even our new Discord server. We hope you enjoy.
Are our levels where you would like them? I mean, we could just do it all ASMR style.
The thing about that book
That's
was
right.
Just late night NPR jazz here on
so
KWTF.
that kobold, he was like, hello.